Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm Maxine de Brunner, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, and I'm responsible for delivering all specialist policing services in London at the moment. That includes every animal, so all dogs, every boat, marines, helicopters, covert policing, intelligence, any kind of public order response, and of course, horses. But I'm here today to speak about horses and the role of horses in service. Personally, I ride for pleasure, and I've ridden for as long as I can remember. And I'm one of the 3 senior officers within the Metropolitan Police who ride on duty at events. Currently, as I have responsibility for the Metropolitan Police Mounted Branch, I have 107 horses currently in service in London. I have no plans to replace them with vehicles, just for the record. That's me and a colleague helping to change the guard a couple of weeks ago. So in terms of the context of what is the police force for me they do 3 things. They're here to fight crime, maintain public order and respond in public order incidents, and they're here for protection duties. They're incredibly versatile. So for example, I can replace about 21 constables on the street with maybe 4 or 5 horses because of their ability to work a crowd and the high vantage point you get, so you can see events changing in front of you. And the other piece about horses, which is absolutely amazing, is members of the public love to talk to you. Well, not talk to you, like to pat the horse that you're on. And that's amazing for engagement, because quite often we face problems with members of the public who don't want to speak to the police necessarily, but as soon as you have a horse in tow, the barriers drop down and you can really start to see what's going on. So I'm just going to move on and talk in a little bit more detail about the 3 things that they're for: fighting crime, public order response, and protection. So I've tried to make all my horses a lot more visible. And I think previously, when you have any kind of police briefing, it's usually done inside. Nobody gets to hear what's going on, and the first the public know is you see some officers or police horses patrolling around the streets of London. I've tried to change some of that, and now we brief on the streets. So here in this particular photograph, you'll see 32 of my horses parading at Trafalgar Square for what we call a street briefing. And therefore the public and the community can actually hear why we're there, what we're there to do, the role of the horses and the role of the officers at that particular event. And they can see us there en masse. So nothing is done behind closed doors anymore. We try and do everything around our briefings actually out there on the streets with the public, and that started to work really well. Currently, I've got 72 operational horses in London, and they're positioned in the north, south, east and west of the capital, and also within central London. The remaining 35 horses are currently always in training or turned out, so there's a rolling programme of training and respite for the horses. They're deployed all over London, and mounted officers are expected to stop people and make arrests as a normal uniformed officer would be expected or required to do. And can I say that's pretty tricky on a horse? Police quite often say to me, especially if I'm on a horse myself, they say, "It must be great riding a police horse, they're bomb-proof." But despite their training, they are horses, and they react like horses, and they can be pretty tricky to ride in certain situations. There was a crime-fighting patrol a few years ago in Hackney, and it was being ridden by one of my most experienced mounted officers, PC Colin Darcy, and his horse called Merlin. Merlin is a big grey 17-hand gelding. Officers usually have their own horses allocated to them for the duration of their time within the mounted branch. So Colin was patrolling along the towpath in next to Regent's Canal, and there was a big builders merchants who were taking down a large set of officers right next to the towpath. And the crane operator decided he would demolish the building at the time that Merlin and Colin were just walking past with a very large wrecking ball. So I hear what you say about some people having no idea about horses and what they might do in any given situation. So the resulting noise of the demolition made Merlin jump upwards, and Colin would say, "Well, you know what it's like, Mum, when all 4 feet are off the ground and the steering and brakes have gone." At that point, Merlin managed to twist, manoeuvre, and landed on all 4 feet. Unfortunately, he landed right in the middle of the canal. It took our fire brigade colleagues, not that we've ever lived it down, a winch, several packets of polos, and lots of encouragement to get both Colin and Merlin out of the canal that day. That's what I mean about their horses. They do react to things the same as everybody else's horses. Colin and Merlin, however, were due on a very important event the next day. So I was very pleased neither were hurt, but both were incredibly dirty. That's Colin and Merlin the next day at an event, having had a very good wash. Colin, however, has never lived the episode down. We still rib him about it. The next piece that I want to talk to you about is the role of horses in public order. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this section because, for me, this is what our horses are there to do. And I think this is an incredibly difficult discipline to train, both for the rider and for the horse. Horses naturally are flight animals, but I need them to fight in certain situations. I need them to be brave. And of course, being in a public order situation is completely against the instinct of the horse. So we train them for about 2 years, depending on the horse, not dependent on us. And not all of them make it. So we usually take a horse, when we buy a horse, we usually take them on trial. And my trainers assess them over a period of 2 or 3 months, really to see if they're going to be brave. Now, I thought that I'd be clever and I'd try some of the public order training myself to see if I could understand what it was like for both the horse and rider. And the first thing that struck me in all that gear is how heavy it is. And the second thing was how on earth you get on and off a horse in what can only be described as a Michelin outfit. But colleagues do that on a regular basis. So the first time I rode on duty, or the first time I went for training, I went down to our training establishment at Invercourt, and the instructor, who I have to say showed me no mercy, said, "Don't worry, Mum, all I need you to do is trot round the school, take up canter, and you'll be fine." So I thought, well, I can do that. So as I hit canter, he let off the police siren in the corner of the school. And I jumped pretty high. Luckily, my horse didn't. He'd heard it all before. But at that point, I remember thinking, how remarkable is this, that a police horse will ride in a school, not react to a police siren going off right next to him, and loads of flags waving, when my own horse has had me off over cheese and onion crisp packet on the floor. So my horses, they need to be able to remain really calm, especially in traffic and tricky situations. And in terms of the traffic in London, to be honest, it's pretty awesome to ride in London at the moment. I did a fixed point at Piccadilly Circus a few weeks ago. And of course, buses stop right next to your tail. They have no idea that it's an animal that you're sat on. And then you have a large amount of tourists, and you have these bus matrix boards that churn around and then stop with this enormous clatter, which makes your horse usually jump a couple of feet into the bus that's right up your tail. So I think that's a real challenge, actually, in terms of riding in London. So the horse must be able to remain calm in traffic. They really need to not mind being loaded and boxed, because I do need them to deploy anywhere that they're needed in London. They need to be unafraid of the dark. And trust me, lots of horses are, especially when you work them in dark situations. And they need to be at least 16 hands and preferably a bit stocky because of the weight of the public order equipment and the saddle. So gradually we increase their exposure to different surfaces, and we start exposing them to crowds, especially where we don't anticipate any problems. So once we've got their heads around the basics, we start riding in formation. And we ride in a public order situation 6 inches knee to knee, and we practice riding in various formations and gaits. And they are exposed to simulated riots at our public order training centre. Now, of course, in a public order situation, there is always the possibility that members of the public will throw things at us, and they do. So we have to find a way, the best way we can, to get the horses used to that exposure. So what we do is we lob bricks at the officers, not the horses, to let the horse watch what may happen in a public order situation. I've had some complaints from the officers, but the horses are fine. And then gradually we throw tennis balls in and around them, so they get the idea that missiles come from overhead. And then gradually we introduce them to other missiles such as petrol bombs and start seeing if they will walk round and take their way around fire. It's usually at that point, if they're going to spin 180 on you, they do it at that point. It's good to find out in the training ground whether you're going to be facing the opposite direction or whether you are going to canter into the crowd or not. But they never really finish their training, so they come down to the Public Order Training Centre at least twice a year, more if we have the capacity to allow them to do that. Once they're deployed, I can use about 10 horses to regulate a flow of a crowd of about 90,000 at an event like Wembley. So in terms of how valuable they are in terms of replacing the constable, what they can do, what I can do with a few of them is really quite awesome. So this slide in particular was the August riots in London. Well, in that particular event, they cleared the crowds pretty quickly. However, public order situations, they're not always great for the officers, as you can see in the next slide. So here are some of the disadvantages of deploying in a public order situation. And that's what I mean about you never really know what the public are going to throw at you. In this particular instance, a member of the public threw a can of paint at the officer. As you can see, he's pretty covered in it, and it took us some time to wash him and the horse up. The horse and the rider both had protective shields around their eyes, so neither were hurt in this incident. But it does bring it home to us what sometimes we ask our working horses to do. So for me, a public order response is one of the hardest disciplines as well as one of the most important. It can't be done by a car, it can't be done by officers on foot duty. They have a particular role and they are really, really good at it. The next of the disciplines that we use our horses for is for protection. The mounted branch carry out protection duties, whether it be of VIPs, officials or at ceremonial events. Some protection duties require the officer who's riding to be armed, so we have to get those horses trained in a specialist environment so they're accustomed to the sound of gunfire from the saddle. This particular slide shows PC Twig on a horse called Lorcan. Now this is a pair on protection duty at the Olympics this year. Lorcan's an ex-circus horse. You may have read about him in the papers. He's 17-1's Hampshire Cross, and he spent 4 years before he came to us entertaining the crowds. He very easily adapted to police work because of the exposure he'd already had to noise and different surroundings and different terrains. He's great at dressage, he's great at walking sideways, and he's great at bowing in front of a crowd. The difficulty we've had, actually, is breaking him of some of his old habits. When he sees a crowd, unprompted by the rider, he will canter towards the crowd, stop, a dead stop, bow, do a little dressage move, and then at the end of it, he'll rear and stop, and that's the end of his routine. Luckily, PC Twig has quite a good seat. Lorcan isn't just a circus horse anymore. It's only a couple of months ago that Lorcan and PC Twig chased and apprehended a suspect for burglary, which they successfully brought into custody without bowing or rearing. So at 11 years old, I think Lorcan's got a great police career ahead of him. Ma'am, you may recognise yourself riding at a ceremonial occasion next to the Duke of Kent. The police mounted guard on this particular event are where they should be, in the back, looking out for their officials. Now, the Duke of Kent, who can be seen in the centre picture, is riding one of my horses called Trident. Trident is a police horse who we've had for years, actually. He's fairly old. Although we retired him a couple of years ago, we bring him back for events like Trooping the Colour because, one, he's so good at them, and I think the Duke of Kent quite enjoys riding him. So we do still bring him back, and we'll carry on bringing him back for as long as Trident is able to do so. And of course we can bring our horses back because we never sell a horse. Once they're in service for a lifetime. When retired, they either go out on loan, stay with one of the officers who's been riding them for their working service, or they go into care and respite with the Horse Trust, who I am immensely grateful to. So we never sell a horse, so they're always within our care throughout their life, And any horse that does go out on loan, we do check them. And if we're not happy with the conditions the horse is kept in, then we bring them back into our own paddocks and then and rehouse them or give them respite care from there. And again, this was the Sovereign's Grey escort for the Royal Wedding last year. But the officers there, although they're riding a number of our grey horses, they have a job to do. And their job is not about riding for a ceremonial occasion. Their job is to clear and secure a route, protect the officials, and maintain and manage the crowds. So they have a particular role to do so that members of the royal family and the military can have their event without any kind of delays. So hopefully that's given you a quick insight into the Metropolitan Police Mounted Branch and the role of working horses within police service. But if you just remember that the main functions of our police forces are three things. They're crime fighters, they're there to maintain a public order response, and they're there to protect VIPs and officials in these types of roles.